The Galactic Empire had fought countless wars, crushed rebellions, and subjugated entire species. Yet, among the vast expanse of conquered worlds, there was one race that inspired an unease the Empire could never quite extinguish: humans. Physically, they were unremarkable compared to the towering war beasts of Kravosh or the telekinetic seers of Vyloth. Their homeworld, Earth, was a backwater in galactic terms, a speck of dust in an empire that stretched across 1,000 systems. And yet, despite their lack of natural advantages, humans had a way of surviving the impossible. They adapted, they endured, and most dangerously, they learned. It was this knowledge that kept the Imperium wary. It was also why the capture of John Kane was considered such a momentous victory. Kane had been running operations along the fringes of Imperial space, striking supply routes, sabotaging installations, and disappearing before the Empire could mount a response. He had become a ghost story, a whispered name among officers who should have been too disciplined to entertain superstition. But whispers alone did not warrant fear, until now. The raid on the desert moon of Cthar had been swift. Kane had been cornered, outnumbered 100 to 1. The Empire's elite hunters had surrounded him, and though he had fought like a demon, there were limits even to human resilience. The stun charges had finally brought him to his knees. Now, he sat in the dim belly of a prison transport, bound in restraints designed for creatures twice his size. The walls hummed with the low pulse of the ship's power core. Across from him, an Imperial warden observed him with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying a specimen. "John Kane," the warden mused, tapping a clawed finger against his data slate. "Your file is extensive." Kane remained silent, his dark eyes unwavering. "You know, human," the warden continued, his voice rich with condescension, "I have never understood your kind stubbornness. You are beaten, captured, and utterly at my mercy. A sensible creature would recognize its place." Kane tilted his head slightly, as if considering the statement. Then, in a voice calm as a knife sliding from its sheath, he said, "You should have killed me." The warden chuckled. "A prisoner of your reputation is worth more alive. The Empire wishes to study you, to understand what makes your kind so tenacious." Kane exhaled slowly. "Then you really don't understand at all." Before the warden could respond, the ship's intercom crackled. "Approaching Cartho's penal facility. Prepare for docking." The warden's smirk widened. "Welcome to your new home, human." The transport shuddered as it docked. The airlock hissed open, revealing the towering silhouette of the facility beyond, a monolithic slab of metal and stone hanging in orbit over a dead planet. Carthos was more than a prison. It was a graveyard for the living, a place where inmates disappeared into the void, forgotten by all but the walls that held them. Kane was led through dimly lit corridors, past rows of cells that reeked of rust and despair. The air was thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, of desperation curdling into madness. Guards in black armor stood at attention, weapons held loosely, confident in their control. They saw a man in chains and assumed he was already broken. The warden gestured toward a reinforced cell at the end of the hall. "You'll be comfortable here." "Well, as comfortable as one can be in Carthos." Kane stepped inside without resistance. The heavy door sealed behind him with a finality that echoed through the chamber. For a long moment, he simply stood there, breathing in the cold metallic air. Then, he walked to the small, reinforced window that overlooked the prison's central block. Hundreds of prisoners, of various species, moved like insects beneath him. From the shadows of a neighboring cell, a low voice murmured, "You don't belong here, human." Kane turned his head slightly, meeting the pale, slit-pupiled eyes of a reptilian inmate. "They don't know what they've done," the creature continued. "They think they have captured a man. They do not understand they have caged something far worse." Kane said nothing. He didn't need to. The prisoner's gaze flickered to the way his fingers flexed, the way his breathing remained measured, controlled. "They call you something," the reptilian whispered. "I have heard it in hushed tones among the guards. Baba Yaga." Kane's expression remained impassive, but a glimmer of something unreadable passed through his eyes. The reptilian pressed closer to the bars. "Is it true? Are you what they say?" Kane finally spoke, his voice a whisper carried on steel. "They should have killed me." Outside the cell, the warden chuckled as he strolled past, utterly oblivious to the storm he had just locked inside his own walls. The first mistake the guards made was assuming the chains would hold him. They were forged from reinforced carbitanium, designed to restrain creatures far stronger than humans. The restraints dug into Kane's wrists, heavy, unyielding. But it was never about strength. It was about patience. For 2 days, he observed. He listened. Every shift change, every guard rotation, every lapse in vigilance was catalogued with cold precision. The warden thought this place was unbreakable, but Kane had seen better prisons fall. Carthos was just another fortress with weak spots waiting to be exploited. His cell was positioned above the central block, a vantage point that let him study the rhythm of the prison. The guards were complacent, relying more on automated security than their own instincts. The inmates, a mix of hardened criminals and political prisoners, had been beaten into submission. There was no hope here, only survival. That would change soon. On the third night, Kane tested the guards. When they entered to deliver rations, he shifted slightly, eyes downcast, shoulders slack. A predator mimicking prey. The closest guard, a hulking brute of a species Kane didn't recognize, sneered at the perceived weakness. "Not so dangerous now, are you?" the guard mocked, stepping closer. Kane moved. The chain meant to restrain him became a weapon, a loop snapping tight around the alien's thick throat. One sharp twist crushed cartilage, cutting off the strangled gurgle before it could become a scream. The second guard reached for his weapon, too slow. Kane drove an elbow into his temple, following up with a precise strike that shattered the alien's knee. The guard crumpled, his agonized wheeze drowned by the alarms beginning to wail. Kane took the fallen guard's shock baton and stepped out of the cell. The corridor erupted into chaos. Prisoners howled in excitement, fists pounding against metal bars, the scent of rebellion thickening the air. He moved fast. The goal was never just escape, it was control. He needed weapons, access, leverage. The armory was 2 floors below, locked behind biometric scanners and reinforced bulkheads. Standard Imperial security, predictable and flawed. Kane reached a control panel and yanked the unconscious guard's limp hand to the scanner. The lock clicked open. Amateurs. The armory was lightly guarded, a testament to Imperial arrogance. They never expected a prisoner to reach this deep into their infrastructure. Kane entered silently, dispatching the 2 guards inside with brutal efficiency. Rows of weapons gleamed under cold artificial light. Pulse rifles, shock grenades, combat knives, tools of destruction, waiting for hands that knew how to wield them. Kane selected what he needed and turned his attention to the prison's security systems. The control panel was complex but not impenetrable. A few keystrokes disabled the automated turrets and unlocked every cell in the block. The effect was instantaneous. Prison doors hissed open, and the halls of Carthos roared with the sound of the forgotten reclaiming their freedom. Kane stepped out, pulse rifle in hand, as chaos spread like wildfire. The first wave of guards rushed in, expecting disorderly riots, not tactical extermination. Kane moved through them like a shadow, precise and merciless. Each shot counted, each strike deliberate. He wasn't just fighting for his own escape, he was sending a message. The warden, watching from his high tower, finally understood the gravity of his mistake. "Seal the exits," he barked into the comms. "Deploy the suppressors. Kill the human, now." But it was already too late. Kane had reached the central control hub, where a handful of desperate officers scrambled to regain control. He entered with the quiet finality of a guillotine. The officer at the main console barely had time to turn before Kane put a blade through his throat. The others hesitated. He could see it in their eyes, that flicker of doubt, the moment when courage wavered in the face of something they didn't understand. "Baba Yaga," one of them whispered. Kane let them run. He didn't need more blood tonight. Fear was a sharper weapon. He accessed the prison's mainframe, overriding the lockdown. A single command sent the remaining security forces into disarray, releasing a false emergency alert that a fleet-wide breach was underway. The Empire would divert ships, leaving Carthos vulnerable. Kane turned to leave, but a voice stopped him. "You planned this from the moment they caught you." The reptilian prisoner from earlier stood in the doorway, eyes gleaming with something between awe and terror. Kane simply nodded. "You're not just escaping," the reptilian said slowly. "You're burning this place to the ground." Kane slung the rifle over his shoulder. "They should have killed me." Behind him, the flames of Carthos began to rise.
The warden had fled. Kane had expected as much. Men like him, men who commanded from behind walls and layers of security, were never the type to face death with dignity. He had abandoned the prison, retreating to the control tower, where he no doubt hoped to send a distress signal before it was too late. But it was already too late. Smoke curled through the corridors, the acrid stench of burning metal and charred bodies filling the air. The prisoners had turned on their captors with the kind of fury only those long denied justice could summon. The guards fought, but they fought like men who had already lost. Kane did not stay to watch the slaughter. There was no need. He moved through the crumbling structure with singular purpose. The control tower was heavily fortified, but nothing in Carthos was built to withstand an enemy who had already breached its walls. He approached the blast doors and placed a charge against the locking mechanism. The explosion sent a shockwave down the hall, and before the smoke had cleared, Kane stepped through. The warden stood at the far end of the room, trembling fingers working frantically at the console. His ornate uniform, once a pristine symbol of imperial authority, was damp with sweat. His bulbous eyes darted to Kane as he entered. "I," the warden stammered, straightening as if he could somehow reclaim his lost dignity. "I am an officer of the Imperium. You kill me, and the full force of the Empire will." Kane fired. The warden collapsed, a smoking hole in his chest. The body twitched once, then stilled. Kane stepped over the corpse and studied the console. The warden had managed to get a partial signal out, but Kane wasn't concerned. A distress call would bring reinforcements, but by the time they arrived, Carthos would be nothing but wreckage and echoes. He accessed the station's central systems, fingers moving quickly across the controls. The prison had emergency override functions, designed in case of riots or external attack. Kane used them now, overriding the power grid and forcing the station's reactor into a controlled meltdown. The process would take time, but once started, it was irreversible. Behind him, footsteps. Not hurried. Measured. He didn't turn. "You planned this," the reptilian prisoner said again. Kane exhaled slowly. "Of course." The alien let out a low, rattling chuckle. "Then I suppose the only question left is, where do we go from here?" Kane turned to face him. "You do whatever you want," he said. "The ships in the hangar are unlocked. Get out before this place burns." "And you?" Kane checked the ammunition in his rifle, then slung it over his shoulder. "I have business with the Empire." The reptilian studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "Good hunting, Baba Yaga." Kane said nothing. He simply walked away, disappearing into the smoke and ruin. Behind him, Carthos began to die. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the shattered remains of Carthos. From the cockpit of a stolen Imperial dropship, Kane watched as the prison station burned, its skeletal frame cracking under the pressure of its own imploding reactor. Fires flickered in the void, debris scattering like dying embers. A fitting grave for a place that had swallowed so many lives. He adjusted the flight controls, guiding the ship toward the vast darkness ahead. The Imperium would be coming. The distress signal had gone out, and even if the station was beyond saving, the Empire would want answers. More importantly, they would want revenge. Kane had no intention of giving them the luxury of choosing the battlefield. A low chime from the console signaled an incoming transmission. Encrypted, but imperial in origin. He considered ignoring it, but curiosity won. With a few keystrokes, he decrypted the message. A woman's voice filled the cabin, cool and precise. "John Kane, if you are hearing this, then you have survived Carthos. I expected nothing less." He didn't recognize the voice, but something about it carried the weight of authority. Not a mere officer. Someone higher. Someone who had been waiting for this. "You have their attention now," she continued. "The warden was a fool, but the Imperium does not suffer fools for long. They will send someone better next time. Someone who knows what you are." Kane leaned back, considering. "I suggest you come find me before they do," the voice said. "I believe our interests may align. Coordinates attached." The transmission ended. A set of numbers flashed across the screen, marking a system deep in uncharted space. Kane exhaled slowly. A trap? Possibly. But he had spent his life walking into traps. The difference was, he was the one who always walked out. He keyed in the coordinates, set the ship to autopilot, and closed his eyes. For now, there was only the silence of space, and the hunt that lay ahead.